The mountain hare, it's a fairly unique species that it's evolved to effectively live in the upland and montane areas of Scotland and other parts of Scandinavia. It's a very effective grazer-browser, and in my career and lifetime, and I can remember as a youngster, as a gamekeeper's son on the west coast, when you saw mountain hares. And I think the big pivotal changes have been that mountain hares these days seldom prosper away from areas that haven't been quite intensively, you could say, carefully managed for game shooting. And I think that nobody doubts how important Lepidus timidus, the mountain hare, is to our ecology. In fact, it's the only indigenous hare in the UK. The brown hare isn't. So I don't think there's a land manager or gamekeeper or deer stalker that isn't delighted to see them and aware how important they are as a prey species. But if I can put it in context, when I started my career managing woodlands and working with the Forestry Commission, the hare and its impact as a browser, particularly on the emerging and established woodlands, was every bit as seriously managed as deer were. And it seems to be now we've got, due to emotion, we've got to a situation where we have a public who are lambasting landowners for not shooting enough deer, but on the same side are lambasting landowners for shooting hares. And that for me is the confusion point. I don't know what you think.
That's the mountain hare, or blue hare, in a nutshell. It's not doing well on unmanaged land in Scotland. That's the Anti's dream of letting the Scottish countryside return to nature. You won't see many, or any, in places like that. It's doing so well on gamekeepered land that they have to hold mountain hare shoots just to keep the population down to a level where the animals won't suddenly die from starvation or disease. But on Wednesday the 17th of June 2020, the Scottish Government, led by Nicola Sturgeon, ignored reality and voted to ban the catching or killing of hares except under licence. Like much of rural Scotland, wildlife manager Niall Rowantree finds the new law unbelievable.
I think what everybody feels, Charlie, and from conversations I've had with colleagues, this came in as a late amendment at stage 3, and that's where it all seemed to start to unravel, because people were then acting on emotion rather than on science. And this looks to me like a fairly open and shut case of, you could say, the pressure lobbies and the animal welfare vision overtaking the actual science of sustainably managing natural resources. There's an enormous disconnect between urban and rural Scotland, and that there's a perception that people active in the land and countryside, be they gamekeepers, deer stalkers, farmers, crofters, that they're somehow incompetent and that their day-to-day lifestyle is threatening Scotland's wildlife. And I think it's because of the rhetoric we're being sold. And it's not just deer and hares. It seems to be invading all of our society. Government reacts to social media and public pressure before it reacts to good sense and science.
Roy Lupton has been going to Scotland as a falconry tourist for a quarter of a century. He fears this marks the end of his love affair with the Highlands. He watched political events unfold on television on the Scottish Parliament livestream.
It seemed that the science was completely ignored from the debate, certainly on the SNP and on the Green side. And I would have said that the decision wasn't made for conservation. It was purely a political move.
One thing which I sort of get out of this is one of the first significant wildlife hunting banning laws where they've been able to say, look, we in the urban world of urban politics don't believe you in the countryside should be allowed to manage wildlife. Did you get a sense that was happening last night, that there was regime change going on?
Yeah, most definitely. And I think, unfortunately, it's the thin end of the wedge that we're going to see. There does seem to be an awful push from a lot of different organisations to start eroding what we do. And I think this is really what, unfortunately, the very start of what I think is going to be a process that continues to persecute us and to persecute the people that are actually on the ground caring for these environments and keeping them in pristine condition.
Talk about your experience of hunting hares with falcons. How long have you been doing, and what does it take, and what enjoyment do you get out of it?
I mean, from falconry, I've been practicing falconry since I was 9 years old. But the mountain hare side of it, I've been doing for just over 25 years. So 25, 26 years, I've been travelling up to Scottish estates, moorland, and hunting on them. And I've hunted all across Scotland at different times. And certain times I was spending more than a couple of weeks. We were up there for 6 to 8 weeks each season. And so over the years, I've seen the exactly what goes on with the populations of mountain hares. So I've seen the natural boom and bust cycles that they go through, and obviously when they go through a bust cycle, it can take a long time for them to recover. And I think what people don't realise, and especially if this was really, it was highlighted, but it was ignored by the parties that were against it yesterday, is that the only place that you see significant numbers of mountain hares, and you still see significant numbers of mountain hares, are on managed grouse moors. If you go to estates that are not managed grouse moors, if you go to the estates that are managed by the RSPB, supposedly for conservation, you'll do well to see mountain hares. They're not able to sustain themselves in any number at all. So they've got a fantastic opportunity to create areas up there by working alongside the grouse moor keepers, to have natural reservoirs and natural pockets of the hares. And basically what they've done is destroyed the ability to keep these reservoirs, because if the hares then go through some of these cycles and then hit these lows, with the population densities being so low in other areas, I think you could almost see the species declining to a point where it's almost impossible to come back. But again, going back to my time spent on the moors, in those 25 years, I've not seen a decline in the numbers on managed estates. You go onto managed estates and the numbers are still as high as they were 25 years ago. It's the numbers that are declining in other areas. But it's this legislation that has come in is targeting the very areas where you've still got good numbers. And in doing this, it's just going to allow the disease through the gut burden of parasites in the hares to boom, and then we're going to see a bust cycle directly afterwards, which obviously has massive, wide-ranging effects on the species that rely on them, such as golden eagles. And we're going to see disastrous consequences as a result. And again, it's just because they're not prepared to listen to the science, and they're not prepared to listen to the actual people that are on the ground caring for these species.
What I'd like to do is put a bit of context in this, that interestingly, we're aware that behind closed doors discussions are already commencing about how they license the shooting of mountain hares. So Scottish Natural Heritage and other government advisors have looked into this. They've established population monitoring systems that have been reviewed and agreed as accurate. They've looked at impacts. They know the influence of disease on high-level hare populations. So some mechanism of control is going to be required, Charlie, because we're not talking about a blanket success for a species from one end of the montane areas of Scotland clean to the other. There'll still be areas where mountain hares are absent for a host of reasons, and there'll still be areas where populations spike. So the immediate challenge that I would feed back to them is that how can you demand of landowners through current legislation that you can kill and take deer for damage or the likelihood of damage, but on the same site, under the Wildlife and Countryside Act, you'll only be able to control hares for serious damage. So immediately we've removed parity. So if we're saying serious damage is our criteria for one sentient mammal, then come on guys, are we going to make it the same criteria for another mammal? So we now, when deer come up for discussion in the near future, going to remove the principle of the likelihood of damage and require serious damage there too. Because to my mind, this is the start of a slippery slope when we remove or emotionally shut down countryside practices.
It's not enough to say that the SNP were lied to. The SNP has to take responsibility for the future of the welfare of the hare, and when there are photographs of mass die-offs, they will go into the media with the caption, "Nicola Sturgeon did this." But we should look as well at the people who did the lying. Did the Green Party willfully ignore the science?
I think in their hearts they probably know that it's true. they were very dismissive, I think, of the great work that has been done. I know personally a lot of the guys that work on some of the moors, and they've been heavily involved in producing scientific work and producing accurate counts and being accountable for what they do. But again, that was just railroaded by the parties yesterday. And again, I think it's just because of the political movements behind it that are really there as a front against shooting, because they don't agree with our way of life, and they don't agree with people owning large chunks of Scottish estates.
You've got birds dedicated to catching hares in Scotland, which is, it is a fairly marginal activity.
Yeah.
But you've also got dogs dedicated to doing it. What happens to everybody who have bred their dogs and their birds for this purpose?
I've no idea. I mean, obviously, I've spent the last 25 years revolving my seasons, my work, everything I do around my falconry. It's a passion I've always had, and it's something that has always driven me. And as I say, for the last 25 years, I've got 3 golden eagles that I fly. One of them is 25, 26 years old, so I've been working with him up on the moors since he was fledged. And we cut our teeth up there hunting the hares, and we've continued to do so. And so for people like myself, you're just left sitting in a quandary, wondering if there is going to be any sensible licensing that comes out of this to allow for certain control. Because again, this is what I don't understand with all of these protectionist measures. It blows in the face of conservation, because every species that does well in today's society, in today's age, the only species that are thriving are the species that are being managed and are being cared for and are being looked after, and if they've got an intrinsic value. At the heart of all conservation now, there is only ever going to be species survive when they have an intrinsic value, which sport gives them. As we've seen in Africa, we've hark on about it all the time. If you go to the countries that don't allow hunting, their wildlife populations are decimated by poaching, because there's nobody there to care for them. There's nobody there to stop it, or the land is just completely grazed off.
This point that wildlife only survives if it has value is most starkly illustrated in Africa. I spoke to Clayton Fletcher, a guide at Tinashe Safaris in South Africa, to get his take on this.
The reality of caring for animals is creating value. And unfortunately, the only value that you can create is basically hunting, because if animals in South Africa especially, the biggest problem we have here is land. There's not enough land for these animals. So if private landowners don't have any value from these animals, then they're going to be breeding cattle and sheep and all these other animals. So the hunting is actually what's causing the private landowner to use his land to breed these animals, because they are valuable. And if you stop hunting, you take away the value.
That's all very well when you're talking about lions and hippos, but does it apply to hares? Well, yes, it does. Hare coursing is still going strong in Ireland, and they course the indigenous mountain hares, same species that's had the ban in Scotland. Research from Queen's University in Belfast found that there are 18 times more hares in areas managed for coursing than in areas that are not managed for coursing. 18. You want hares? Choose coursing. Here's Jason Doyle from our Fieldsports Ireland show.
It's all very well regulated, but coursing has been going on so long here, and it's proven to benefit the hare population. Areas that are managed for coursing have an awful lot more hares than areas that aren't, and that's proven by independent scientific studies.
Back to Scotland and looking forward, Niall says there is political hope for the hare.
The fact that it's a late stage amendment to the Parliament that was voted on means that no one's reviewed the science here, and they're going to be forced into a position where conservation of habitats and preservation of species is going to be challenged by this decision, and they're going to have to rethink this. But I think at the moment parliaments across the country are being driven by social media and public opinion and not by science. The tragedy, I think, is a lot of people in the anti-shooting lobby make reference to gamekeepers, and they'll refer to things like Osgood Mackenzie's writings of game book registers. Now, if you were an old keeper in the 1890s and the laird was a day's travel away, of course you put a lot of stuff like crows and buzzards and things like that in the game book because it kept them happy. But it seems odd that they'll take that as accurate, Charlie, but then when they speak to land managers now on the ground, they won't take what we say as accurate. In fact, we're accused practically of being criminals and malignant to society. So the First Minister has reacted to local social politics, but if they're going to take the welfare of the country and its heritage to heart, they have to listen to their advisors, and this will have to be addressed. I wouldn't be surprised if they end up amending acts to come up with other mechanisms for licensing the control of hares.
Thanks for watching. There are more podcasts on our website, fieldsportschannel.tv, details in the description below. You can also see the original films with all that glorious eagle cam footage. You can watch our weekly show, Field Sports Britain, and you can watch our other shows, including Field Sports Ireland.